Charles Darwin wrote to his friend, and whom he called evangelist, T.H. Huxley, in 1860, in a personal letter. 1860 was 1 year after he published The Origin of the Species, and he wrote to T.H. Huxley on this wise. He addressed him as my dear friend and propagator of the gospel, i.e., the devil's gospel. I'm not going to argue with Charles Darwin on that particular point, because I do believe that evolution, the theory thereof, is indeed the devil's gospel, just as he himself recognized, and he put it exactly so. In 2024, last year, Daniel Dennett, who is an evolutionary philosopher, passed away. He wrote a book called Darwin's Dangerous Idea. And in his book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, he said that Darwinism, evolutionary philosophy, is a universal acid. That is, it touches everything that you might think of. It touches every aspect of life. It touches everything regarding morality, religion. It even touches how I think, rationality. It touches everything. It is a universal acid. Illustrative of this is a man who came to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville several years ago. His name is William Provine. William Provine was an evolutionary biologist at Cornell University, and he came in 1998 to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville on what is called Darwin's Day. That would be February 12th, really Lincoln's birthday, in 1998. And here's basically a thumbnail sketch, and I'm going to quote him, of what he had to say. He said, there are many conclusions regarding evolution that Darwin himself understood perfectly. Number one, no gods worth having exist. Number two, there is no such thing as life after death. Number three, there is no ultimate foundation for ethics. There is no ethical standard that is absolute. Number four, there is no meaning to life. There's no ultimate meaning to life. He goes on to say that these four planks are so widely accepted in the evolutionary field at the university and college campuses and now even high school campuses that I'm not even going to argue with him, and I'm not going to actually try to establish those in your mind. Because everyone understands, and every teacher that teaches understands these to be the case. But he says, I'm going to discuss with you number five, and that is that there is no such thing as free will. No such thing as free will. If matter in motion, of course, is the sole reality, which is what the theory of evolution posits, then that's exactly right. There is no such thing as free will. And he argued that to be the case in the balance of his speech. Pretty remarkable, isn't it? A universal acid touches everything. Darwin himself, later on in the 1860s, reflected on the theory of evolution that he had propounded in 1859, his book, The Origin of the Species. And he reflected on it. He said, sometimes I think that perhaps there is a God, and that he is the first cause of all of these things. I think that way sometimes. However, he said, I recall the fact that my mind is simply the evolution, that is the result of evolutionary development of lower forms of life. And therefore, I can't trust my mind. He said, who would trust a monkey's mind if it drew the conclusion regarding God? So he dismissed the idea of God because his own mind cannot be trusted. It is interesting to note that that four-letter word begins with a B, it's bias. How is it that he could trust his mind to draw conclusions regarding evolution and the evolutionary philosophy, but he could not trust his mind when he reflected on God? Interesting, isn't it? But it does show us exactly the field of evolutionary philosophy and the extreme bias that is built right into the system. So let's think about Darwinism, the devil's gospel, for a few moments. And what I would like to do is to reflect back on some of the points that we've already established in the last couple of lessons. Number one, we have pointed out the definition of evolution is not simply change within a species. It is not, as Kettlewell's moths experiments in England, whether they're light-colored moths or dark-colored moths, and how the dark-colored moths ended up being more prevalent than the light-colored moths. That is not evolution. It is not either, as Jerry Coyne in his book Why Evolution is True tells us, whether in the ancient history mammoths or great big elephants developed hair to give them more warmth in the Arctic regions. That's not about getting longer hair. It's not about the changing of colors in guppies that Richard Dawkins talks about, because some of them now can hide better in their environment. The question is, where do the guppies come from? The question is, where do the moths originate? Where do the mammoths come from? Those are the real issues. And so it's interesting that evolution actually teaches us, tells us that it was matter in the beginning, became an amoeba, life, that is spontaneous generation without scientific evidence. Spontaneous generation became an amoeba. The amoeba became a worm. The worm became a fish. The fish became an amphibian. The amphibian became a reptile. The reptile became a mammal. And the mammal became man. That's the general theory of evolution. And that's what is not established. So that's number one. We looked at the definition of it. So let's not ever, don't let anybody ever confuse us on the definition. Number two, there are only two choices. It's either everything is by naturalism, that is natural order, evolution, or it is by special creation. There are no third alternatives. That's it. And everyone recognizes that to be the case. The reason that the scientific world frequently goes into evolution is just what we pointed out a moment ago regarding Charles Darwin. Bias. They assume that the Bible is not true. As a matter of fact, Charles Lyell, who's the father of modern geology, he already eliminated, he said before, many years before, his even father taught him to eliminate the Bible, any biblical explanation on the world. He is going to reject it. We're going to have to go with one idea, and that is uniformity or uniformitarianism, that is, nature only does it. We are not going to accept God. He accepted that before he ever floated ideas regarding evolution. Charles Darwin was not a believer in God. He was not a believer in the Bible when he went on the voyage of the HMS Beagle and found out there's evolutionary evidence that overturns the Bible. No, he had rejected God. He was already a rejecter of God, rejecter of the Bible. He went on the voyage to find some other explanation. They were not people who were coming to it thinking, what does the evidence tell us? What does the evidence conclude? No, they had rejected God, and there's only one other alternative to which they can turn: evolution. That's it. Same thing with T.H. Huxley. Same thing with Alfred Russel Wallace, all of these early evolutionists. And so also even today, Richard Lewontin tells us, died just a few years ago, he told us very plainly that it is all that we are going to reject the concept of God, biblical creation. But what do you have? There's nothing else. That's where you're going to be. So you're on the track, and that's where they are. So what does that mean? That means, as we looked in the last lesson, it's only nature, natural order. Here's the natural order of things. Everything by nature. Everything outside the box is non-natural, therefore it does not exist. That's a philosophical position. It is not scientific evidence. This is where they begin. It has to be within the box, or it is not real. And that's where they are. So it is a philosophical baseline upon which they build all of their presuppositions and the concepts regarding Darwinism. So that being the case, here we are today, number 5. What are the results of it? What are the results of evolutionary philosophy? And as Daniel Dennett put it, it is a universal acid. Just as Charles Darwin showed us, you can't even trust your own mind to draw any kind of conclusions regarding evidence. Sad, isn't it? So we're going to notice 3 things. And that is, number 1, the devaluation of human life. The devaluation of human life is one of the natural results of evolutionary philosophy. Number 2, abortion. And number 3, sexual deviancy. Those are the three areas that we're going to explore for just in brief, for a few moments. So let's notice the evaluation of human life. Let's think about the passage that was read in our hearing by Brother Bruce a moment ago. God said, let us create man in our own image, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, everything that creeps upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. That which makes man special, that which gives man value, is the image of God. Nothing else created has within it the image of God. What is the image of God? It's not the physical frame in which we live. It is the fact that we have free will. We have moral sensitivity. We can decide what is moral and not moral, what is moral and immoral. We can understand that. Everyone has moral sensitivity. From whence did that derive? Where did it come from? Not only so, but we have rationality. That's the image of God. But what happens when we repudiate the idea that man is created in the image of God? Well, Paul tells us very plainly what happens in Romans chapter 1 and verse 24. Wherefore God gave them up unto uncleanness, that their bodies should be dishonored among themselves, for they changed the truth of God for a lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. What starts with a repudiation of God ends up in devaluing man. Their bodies are dishonored among themselves. And that is exactly what the evolutionists today, one and all, actually tell us to be the case. I'm only going to notice a couple of illustrations. Number one, this is from Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion, a bestseller book. Read it several years ago, read it more than once. Notice how that pro-life doesn't mean exactly pro-life at all. It means pro-human life. Oh, the granting of a uniquely special rights to cells. Where do we learn the special rights? Or where do we learn that man has value? Genesis 1. But he's rejected that. So, of Homo sapiens, it's hard to reconcile with the fact of evolution. The humanness of an embryo's cells cannot confer upon it any absolutely discontinuous moral status. There is no more value to a child in the womb than there is an animal. There is no moral status at all. And therefore, it would not be immoral to take the life of those. That is, of course, the idea that there is a devaluing of human life. Here's James Rachels, who is an evolutionary philosopher. Listen to what he has to say on this one. This is absolutely stunning. Human life will no longer be regarded with the kind of superstitious awe with which it was accorded in traditional thought, and the lives of non-humans will no longer be a matter of indifference. This means that human life, in a sense, and he says it plainly, doesn't he, devalued, while the value granted to non-human life will be increased. A revised view of such matters as suicide, euthanasia, as well as a revised view of how we should treat animals will result. Only man is created in the image of God. Therefore, man has value. The animal kingdom was not created in the image of God. But once you remove that, that's the devaluing of human life, and there is no more value to you than an animal. As a matter of fact, I used this illustration with the high school kids. I said, you know, it was said regarding Jesse James in the Old West that Jesse James could kill a man just as easily as he could step on a bug. But what would be more immoral or deeper immorality in killing a person than stepping on a bug, if indeed we're all exactly the same? There is no more value to you than to an animal or even to an insect. And that's exactly what evolutionists say. That is absolutely, to me, stunning. But let's go to number two. How about abortion? In Psalms 139, verses 13 and 14, we have one of the most glorious passages regarding the value of the child from conception, where David writes that he is wonderfully and marvelously created. And God created him, and he said, you put together my, and the King James has reins, R-E-I-N-S, my reins, and you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am wonderfully and marvelously created. The idea that we have reins, R-E-I-N-S, that is, he's speaking about our inner person. That would be the idea that we have free will. The idea that we have moral sensitivity. That is not to say that we always act morally, humans, but it is to say that we have the sensitivity thereto. And we have not only that, but we have capacity for rational thought. That is how we are marvelously made. But erase that. There is no marvel even in the human embryo. And as you might, of course, imagine, abortion is widely practiced. So Sam Harris, who is still an evolutionary philosopher writing today, in his book called A Letter to a Christian Nation, speaks about, you know what, if you have to abort a child or kill a child in the womb, or if you have children and you have to exterminate one or the other, it's better to take the one that has maybe a disease or something than the other. This is what we get into when there's no value to human life. That is, to me, so grotesque. So also Peter Singer, who is a late, that is, he's passed away now, but evolutionary philosopher. He justifies continually in his books infanticide, killing children, and he tells us that because there's no more value to a human than there is to an animal. There was an evolutionary biologist several years ago in Australia, and he suggested this, apparently with straight face. He said, I propose that mothers who have children, that you have for 2 years when that child is in the home, you have 2 years to decide whether, can I take care of this child? Do I have the means to take care of this child? Do I have the resources to take care of it? Is it too much of a burden on me? If not, if it's too much, then up to 2 years old, exterminate the child. It's hard to believe that people have come to this, but this is only the beginning, if indeed the philosophy of evolution be true. So abortion or even infanticide is going to have to come about, euthanasia as well, if indeed the evolutionary philosophy is true. Let's go to the next one, that is sexual deviance. There are sexual deviants, and all evolutionary philosophers justify every bit of it. So let's notice a couple of them very quickly. This is for Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley was T.H. Huxley's grandson. He lived in the 20th century. He said, I had motives for not wanting the world to have meaning. Consequently, I assumed it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find reasons for this assumption. The philosophy of meaninglessness, just what William Provine said, isn't it? Was essentially an instrument of liberation. We objected to morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. That's really the bottom line, isn't it? Bertrand Russell, who is a famous American philosopher, said exactly, almost in the same words, the same thing. All morality, biblical religion, hinders my sexual freedom. That was his position. Let's notice another one. This is from Randy Thornhill and Craig Palmer in one of the books where they speak about human rape. Now, I want you to get this one for just a moment. Rape arises from men's evolved machinery for obtaining a high number of mates in an environment where females choose the mates. The evolutionary theory proposes or applies to rape as it does to other areas of human affairs on both logical and evidentiary grounds. There is no scientific reason not to apply evolutionary or ultimate hypothesis to rape. In other words, it's all about biology. That's all that it is. It's all about biology. It has nothing to do with making an immoral decision. And one more from Joanne Rogers. The addition, even in the criminal justice system, is coming to recognize that while pedophilia and other forms of exploitive sex must be punished in order to protect the victims, the perpetrators may also be victims. The perpetrators. not necessarily of any abuse, but of their biological predispositions. Nothing in the research suggests that perversions are volitional or that their expression is a failure of self-control. That's where modern psychotherapy most frequently is today. Now, I want at this point to stop for just a moment. And I want to handle a couple of objections that frequently arise when we discuss these things. Number one objection is, well, Bill, you're saying that all evolutionists are immoral, or all atheists are immoral. The answer is no, not at all. No, I'm happy that many atheists and evolutionists live moral lives. I believe that to be the case. But be sure of this. They do not derive their morality or a code for morality from their worldview. They bootleg that out of Christianity. That's where they get it. They get it out of Christianity and they bootleg it right out of Christianity. And I'm happy that they do that, but they do not derive it, the code, from their own worldview. They get it from your worldview. That's where they get it. There is no moral code or ethical standard of conduct in an evolutionary atheistic worldview. So no, I'm not saying that atheists are all immoral. I'm happy that they don't live down to the standard. And I want them to live up to our standard. And I'm happy they don't live down to that standard. On the other hand, objection number two. Objection number two is this. Well, there have been many Christians who have behaved immorally in the past. So it's not just atheists and evolutionists who act immorally. Many Christians have acted immorally. Once again, I say that is absolutely true. That's absolutely the case. But once again, think about what we've just mentioned. And that is that many Christians do not live up to their standard of conduct. They live down to what they see around them. Sadly, that's sad, isn't it? That we don't live up to the standard of conduct, what the Bible sets forward for us. But nevertheless, that's true. But the standard of conduct is here. And many Christians don't, unfortunately, live up to the standard. So it is not how a Christian lives that gives us the standard, even though that gives us influence in the world to live to that standard. The standard is here. And unfortunately, many Christians do not live up to the standard. One area in this that people mention, well, look what Christians did in the Crusades in murdering and killing so many people that were Muslims and going to Jerusalem and trying to establish the kingdom there. Brethren, I want to say this just as kindly as I can. This is why we need to be able to distinguish New Testament Christianity from Roman Catholicism. This is why it has to be done. Because what took place in the Crusades or the Inquisition or the murder of many Christians who had Bibles was done by the Roman Catholic Church, which the New Testament points out is an apostasy, a gross apostasy from the New Testament. But if I'm unwilling to look at that and unwilling to even recognize that to be the case, then I'm going to think, well, Christians do these things too. No, Roman Catholicism did that. That has nothing to do with New Testament Christianity. Yes, the Crusades occurred. And I oppose Roman Catholicism just the same as I oppose evolutionary philosophy. So it's not the case that the Crusades were carried on by Christian people operating on New Testament premises. So those being the objections, a couple of the things, my thoughts on those, let's go back to what William Provine had to say at University of Tennessee when he says, these are the ramifications that Charles Darwin understood perfectly. Remember what he had to say? Number one, no gods worth having exist. I'm going to say yes, God exists. The fact that God exists is a provable proposition. He sent His Son to die for the sins of mankind, and He invites us to come to Him. Come unto me, all ye that labor are heavy laden, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart. You shall find rest unto your souls. Isn't that what we want? Isn't that what we desire? Yes, God does exist. Number two, He pointed out that there's no life after death, if evolutionary philosophy be true. The Bible teaches, indeed, there is life after death. We have Romans chapter 14 and verse 12. We shall all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, as I live, saith the Lord, to me every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall confess to God. So that each one of us must give an account of himself to God. And that will determine where we spend eternity, with Christ in heaven or with the devil and his angels. Those are the only two places to go. There is life after death, and how we live here now will make a determination on where we will spend life after death there. Number 3, regarding what William Provine had to say, he said not only is there no life after death, but he says really there's no ethical standard. Remember him saying there's no ethical standard, no standard of ethical conduct at all. But the Bible teaches there is. All Scripture inspired of God is profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. The ethical standard is the Bible. We will be judged by the Bible. John 12 and verse 48. The word that I spake unto you, you shall be judged by that in the last day. How about William Provine's 4th idea? That there's no meaning at all in life. No meaning whatsoever. The Bible teaches there is meaning in life. Solomon made an experiment in living. And he experimented with the idea there was no living or no purpose in living. But he came to the conclusion, and he writes all of his conclusions in the book of Ecclesiastes. He said, here's what I've concluded. Here's the purpose of living. Fear God, keep His commandments. This is the whole of man. That's it. There's no other purpose than fear God and keep His commandments. That's it. That's the purpose of living. Don't you want to have a purpose for living? What a sad existence it is to say there's no purpose in living. And then number 5 of William Provine's planks, there's no free will. We are told in Revelation 22 and verse 17, come unto me, or the Spirit and the bride say, come. Whosoever will, let him take of the water of life freely. Whosoever will, that is free will. The problem is, many people, even though having free will, have hardened their hearts to the truth of Almighty God, and they have not come to God. So we have the invitation, which is the Bible's invitation, to come to Him, drink of the water of life freely. The lesson is yours if you want to respond to the invitation. We can help you, assist you in any way that we can. If you want to come to the front, we can assist you now or speak to us later. While we stand and sing, come to the front, if you will.